Today, we're taking a pretty rigorous look at relationship mechanics.
We are. We're focusing on a set of sources that argue something pretty fundamental, really.
Yeah, that one specific drive, male sexual desire, acts as the primary leverage point in male-female dynamics.
Right. And we're going straight into the deep end here to explore how that single desire can, determine who's really holding the steering wheel in a relationship.
It's a topic that's often talked about in very emotional or abstract terms.
Definitely. But these sources, they treat it almost like a physics problem. It's about forces and leverage. They suggest that really understanding and critically controlling this drive is the shortcut to understanding authority in a partnership.
The central idea here is this powerful paradox, and I think that's the hook we need to grab onto right away.
What's that?
The sources describe a man's sexual desire as, well, two things at once. It's his greatest weakness.
The thing that can be most easily exploited?
Exactly. But if it's mastered, it also becomes his most powerful weapon.
And that's really the mission for us today in this deep dive. We want to map out that whole journey.
Right.
And, this is something we really want to stress for you listening. If you stick with us through this whole analysis, and I mean, really follow the logic from start to finish.
It's worth the focus.
It is. The sources suggest you'll gain a really powerful insight into how this one drive operates almost like a force of nature in relationships. Understanding it is a game changer.
Okay, so let's start with what the sources call the status quo, the initial point of vulnerability.
Right. The interesting thing is the material argues this power imbalance isn't something that's, learned over time.
It's not cultural.
They argue it's practically innate. That's a key assertion. The source material claims that every woman just instinctively understands that her body, her sexual appeal, it's her most powerful negotiating card in any relationship with a man.
An unconscious knowledge of leverage, then.
Exactly. It's there before any real negotiation even starts.
So if that's the card on the table, what's the default male response, according to this analysis?
Well, the observation is pretty stark. The majority of men simply kneel before this card. That's the quote.
Kneel. That's a strong word.
It is. And this is where the source gets more critical. It points to the real world consequence you see everywhere. Men meaninglessly circling attractive women.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase because it sounds very specific. What does meaninglessly circling actually look like?
It's about the constant, disproportionate spending of resources. We're talking time, emotional energy, money, all of it flowing in one direction without any clear commitment or reciprocity from her side.
So it's things like putting her whims ahead of his own plans or friends, just on the hope that this investment will eventually lead to intimacy.
Precisely. And the sources are very clear that this behavior leads directly to the exploitation of the man's time, money, and emotions.
Exploitation. Again, that's a really loaded term, and some people would just call that, courting or dating. How do the sources justify that?
They define it less as malicious intent from the woman and more as just the natural consequence of a huge power imbalance.
Okay.
I mean, if one person is driven by an urge that makes him ignore his own self-interest and the other person is the only one who can satisfy that urge, well, the dynamic itself becomes inherently exploitative of his investment. It's just cause and effect.
And this all has an immediate, concrete outcome on who's in charge.
Absolutely. The defining moment, the point of surrender, is the instant the man fails to control his desire and is, well, dominated by it.
And
At that point, control of the relationship doesn't just shift a little. The sources say it is completely and totally passed to the woman.
So she's no longer just a potential partner in his eyes. She instantly becomes something else.
She becomes the evaluator, the gatekeeper. The man, because he's compromised by his own desire, he loses his own frame of reference. Her role then crystallizes. She's now the one holding the keys to the one thing he's decided is most important.
So let's dig into that role a bit more, the gatekeeper. When she has that position, what's the mechanism she uses to, keep him in her orbit?
The leverage point is, it's incredibly simple, but also total. She holds the sole decision-making power to allow or not allow physical intimacy. That's it. It's the ultimate scarcity resource in this entire dynamic.
It seems almost too simple that one point of control could dictate so much. But the sources claim this lets her literally design the man's entire life.
It does. Think about it this way. If she controls the satisfaction of his most immediate boiling desire, she indirectly controls everything else. His mood, his behavior, his wallet, his time.
How so?
We'll say he does something she doesn't like or fails to meet some demand, no matter how small. She can just immediately withdraw access. That creates this powerful negative feedback that forces him to change his behavior, his schedule, his spending, all to fit her design.
And the cost for him is described as selling his internal order at bargain prices. That sounds incredibly damaging to a person's self-worth.
It is. What he's selling specifically is his long-term self-respect for short-term biological gratification.
So his standards, his pride.
His standards, his pride, his internal order, all of it. We're talking about a man who starts ignoring his financial goals, or he bails on commitments to his friends, or he accepts disrespect he'd never take from anyone else. All because the immediate drive for sex is clouding his judgment. That's the bargain price, the sacrifice of his dignity.
And the sources note that it escalates. The more it works, the more it's used.
Yes, exactly. A woman who recognizes, even subconsciously, how effective this is will naturally start to use the sex weapon more strongly to get compliance.
So it's not always a conscious manipulative plan.
The source adds that nuance, which is important. For many, it's an unconscious pattern. But it also warns that women with more experience in relationships can become much more conscious and deliberate in using it.
The text uses this really stark classification for a man in this state. It calls him a hormonally controlled slave. Is it really that absolute?
It's intentionally provocative, I think. The authors want to jolt you into seeing the severity of losing your own authority.
I see.
The logic is, if your decisions and your priorities are consistently being dictated by an external reward system that someone else controls, well, it's not a relationship of equals anymore. The label slave is used to emphasize that his actions are driven by a biological program managed by the gatekeepers, not by his own rational mind or his own values.
Wow. Okay, that paints a pretty bleak picture of imbalance. But like we said at the top, this deep dive isn't just about the problem. There's a mechanism for reversal.
Right, and this is the turning point.
So how does a man shift out of that state?
The dynamic undergoes what the sources call a strange and sudden reversal, the very moment he chooses to consciously control his sexual desire. It's an internal action, not an external one.
And why does that one act, that internal choice, completely dismantle the whole structure?
Because it instantly neutralizes her main point of leverage. Her sexual appeal is described as the most powerful nuclear weapon in the relationship. Its power depends entirely on the man being governed by that raw instinct. The second he masters that instinct, the moment he places something else above it, the weapon becomes a dud. It just has no explosive force anymore.
So the idea isn't to become like cold or asexual. It's about achieving a state of internal discipline. This is what the sources start calling ascetic power.
Ascetic power, exactly. It's not about fighting the desire itself, but about actively prioritizing your own internal order over getting that immediate gratification. The real test comes when he faces her demands, or her little tests, those moments designed to see if he'll bend his rules for her.
And to hold that line, he has to make an internal declaration that, well, it runs completely counter to his biology.
It has to be absolute. According to the sources, the internal thought process must be something like, you are attractive, but I will not hold you, even if it means breaking my order or my standards.
He's putting his self-governance above the chase.
Yes. And that is the moment he stops selling his dignity at a bargain price.
Okay, that has to be a radical shift in expectations for the woman in that scenario. What does she see when a man, through his actions, makes that declaration?
The source points to a really profound dual reaction. She feels both bewilderment and simultaneous thrill.
Okay, let's break that down. The bewilderment part makes sense. Her most reliable tool just failed.
Right. The shock is that initial thought, wait, my most trusted weapon doesn't work on this guy.
But where does the thrill come from? That seems counterintuitive.
The thrill is the recognition that comes right after the shock. She realizes this man is fundamentally different from those who flatter her for sex. He's just demonstrated that he has a deeper sense of authority. He can suppress his own instinct with reason, and in her eyes, that makes him real in a way the other circling men just aren't.
So her own unconscious instinct completely shifts. She's no longer trying to use her body as leverage.
Exactly. Her instinct moves away from weaponizing her sexuality and moves toward following what the source calls a greater instinct, the desire to settle within the secure internal order of this strong man. His self-mastery actually creates a kind of gravitational pull that she finds incredibly compelling.
And this brings us right back to that final, really powerful analogy the sources use to sum up the two sides of male desire.
Right. Untamed desire, the weakness we started with, is described as a fetter around the man's neck.
A chain.
Yeah, a chain that chokes his dignity and binds him to her control. It makes him a captive.
But the controlled desire, the strength.
That control becomes a powerful gravity. The force of attraction is still there, of course. But instead of being a chain used against him, it becomes this massive force that pulls the woman into his orbit, an orbit defined by his standards and his order.
And what's so fascinating is that the final takeaway isn't that desire itself is the enemy.
No, not at all. The real danger, the real poison in the dynamic, only appears when desire is placed above a man's own standards and dignity. That inversion of priorities is the moment he opens the door and invites the power imbalance in.
So, to synthesize this whole deep dive, we've looked at how male sexual desire can act as this primary leverage point, which, if it's left untamed, can put the woman in the role of gatekeeper and evaluator.
And we've identified that the only way to neutralize that leverage is, paradoxically, through the man's own intentional self-discipline, that ascetic power we talked about. His ability to say, essentially, that he won't sacrifice his internal order just for gratification.
That conscious control is the key that turns the whole thing around.
It is.
The sources really suggest that if you gain this perspective, you start to see a lot of relationship conflicts differently. Not as, personality clashes.
Right. But as predictable, almost mechanical responses to these underlying leverage points that are operating just beneath the surface.
Which really brings up an important question for you, the listener, to take away from all this. If your own standards and dignity are the only real defense against that kind of spiral of compromise, the question is, how consciously and how consistently are you monitoring which values you prioritize above that desire for immediate gratification in your own life?
That's the real work. Understanding the weapon is step one, but maintaining the integrity of your own internal standard, that's where the power reversal actually begins.
Food for thought. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.